friends. I'm Sabrina, the rookie around here. John and Dick are the old school American fans of F1. Thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation we had about the 2023 Canadian Grand Prix. The various teams' development efforts are coming into focus. Could this be a harbinger of the teams coming closer to Red Bull? A wet quali reinforced why we love Formula One. A podium of champions. It wasn't a surprise to see Max up there. Lewis and Fernando definitely looked happier than we've seen them in a long time. The guys and I discuss how to evaluate the race for this moment in the calendar and beyond. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Gentlemen, the Canadian Grand Prix. I am looking forward to this conversation. I want to hear what you think of the weekend overall, and then I want to go into the specifics as to the race. So let's go with the weekend. Let's just look at free practice. Anything of interest you want to discuss, Dick?
Well, they certainly had weather. And as usual, you know, I always laugh because my father was a meteorologist. So I understand the difficulties of saying we're going to have rain on, you know, Friday and Saturday, but gosh, you know, Sunday's looking great. And then sometimes it turns out that way and sometimes it doesn't. And so when the race engineers were calling into the drivers and saying, hey, you know, rain in 10 minutes and all this. And of course, the rain didn't show up in anything like 10 minutes. It'd be like 30 minutes or whatever. I was just laughing to myself because nobody knows what to do about the weather. It doesn't matter if you're in the United States, Canada, or anywhere else in the world. It was interesting because every chance that they could get to get some dry running, they were out there just pounding around. Normally, you know, you see a session begin and the backfield teams, you know, Williams or maybe AlphaTauri, one of those teams, they'll be the first ones out on the track. But no, this time Red Bull was sending their boys out. They were like always either at the front or darn near at the front at the queue waiting to go out, you know, and I was sitting there going, man, those cars need to have air going through their radiators pretty regular or they're going to overheat. And they were sitting there with the engines running for quite some time before the track went green. And I was just kind of like, okay, well, have fun with that. This was a race that a lot of teams brought upgrades to, or there were upgrades that may have been appearing in Barcelona that maybe weren't fully understood, or they wanted to take a look at it on a circuit that's quite different from Barcelona. So it was very interesting to see how the teams went about their test programs to start arriving at a better understanding of exactly what it is that they've bolted onto the car to try out. Clearly, Aston Martin and Mercedes have made a big step forward with the upgrade packages that they've brought. I know that Ferrari brought some smaller upgrades that weren't as major as what Aston Martin and Mercedes brought, but they still brought some upgrades. But I think that they're also showing that they're understanding the cars better. And to me, what was very interesting is if you look at the GPS traces, the lap times were not that dissimilar from all the top four teams. But it was interesting to see how they made their speed because they made it differently. Red Bull and Aston Martin, they were about dead even when it came to their performance in the slow and medium speed corners, much better than the Mercedes, but the Mercedes gained it back in certain places because they were so good on power out of the corners. And so they were basically winning the drag race from one corner to the next, even though Mercedes and Aston Martin were pretty darn quick through the corners, but Mercedes was winning the drag race. And then when they got to the long straightaways, I was shocked to learn that the Ferraris were actually quicker than anybody in a straight line, which has not been the case this year. We all know it's been Red Bull has just been the king of speed, but not here. Feels like Ferrari must have found something, either a flaw in the basic way that they were setting the car up to begin with, or they've brought an upgrade package that has at least corrected some of their high-speed deficiencies. Maybe they corrected all of it, but I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, I thought that free practice was very interesting for all the reasons Dick's noted. And the interesting thing about the Ferrari's development is they really do have the top speed, had the top speed at this track. But, you know, they continue, it seems to me, to be having tire issues, especially in qualifying. You know, Charles unloaded on the team on the radio, which everybody heard. And he was not happy, I think is a fair thing to say. And they had he was public about criticizing his team. That's pretty rare territory, and he's got to be careful, I think. But he was clearly frustrated by that. The qualifying for this race is one of the things that I really love about this sport. The weather was everything about qualifying. It just made it fascinating because you had to be out there at the right time. If you had the right tires on at the right time, if you made adjustments at the right time, if you were patient and stayed out when everybody else was burying you, but you knew it was coming to you or believed it was coming to you. I mean, Albon at the top on one of them. I mean, it was just spectacular. Very exciting, very interesting. And it gives you the kind of race grid that makes it unpredictable, at least to some extent. We always knew Max was going to win the race, but we really didn't know for sure where Checo was going to go. We weren't sure about whether Lewis was going to take Alonso. The Williams, that was a big surprise, how well they moved up with Albon. To me, qualifying was exactly what we really like about this sport. It gave you so much drama in such a short period of time. I just thought qualifying was fantastic.
Nico initially was given that placement on the front row of the grid, but then there was a decision to give him a grid penalty. And so I wonder what you thought of that decision, any other decisions that were made.
I'll be real interested in Dick's thoughts on this, because I thought it was really unfortunate for Hülkenberg, but because of the conditions and because of track position and because of traffic, it really just was unfortunate for Hülkenberg to end up there. And I was pulling for him, and the American team in Formula One, as high up as he qualified. But honestly, it was a safety regulation and a safety problem. It wasn't unprecedented. It's happened before. The thing that I thought was fair, it was disappointing, but it was fair because the stewards didn't give him a 10-second penalty, which is what's prescribed in the rule book. And so it was costly. It was disappointing, but it was fair under the circumstances for the safety of the drivers.
Dick, do you agree?
I think so. I mean, the blind lady with the scales so many times, right? And
yep.
I'm glad that they were able to go in and really come up with something that took into account some extenuating circumstances too. So I thought it was about right. And of course, I love the idea of Haas doing well. Those guys, they've been pounding away at it for quite a while, right?
Yes.
And with them having their primary sponsor based here in Dallas and all that, darn right I want to see them do well. Shame that they faded in the race, but the beauty of the sport is that there'll be another race 2 weeks from now. So
John, just thinking about the race in general, what do you think listeners I should be gleaning from the ongoing development for the cars across the grid?
Well, we're really getting to that place where they're well down the road on their development programs. And you can see the fruits of that. And some of the teams are doing better. I was surprised at how well Aston Martin moved up in this race. I really did not expect Alonso to qualify as well as he did. Mm-hmm. And so I was surprised by that. And I think that's development. Lance had the car, but kind of threw it away and upset his weekend. I agree with Dick from his earlier statement that Williams was impressive in terms of their progress. And that's especially good to see with Logan driving for them. So unfortunately, his car let him down in the race. But, seeing Williams come forward is a good thing. McLaren, I thought they've got their development program going too, and everything's beginning to get good for everybody that's going to it.
So then let me ask you first, John, and then Dick, I'd like you to chime in. If I'm a new fan, what should I keep in mind regarding this race?
Well, I think in my opinion, you're beginning to see the pecking order sort of line up the way that it will towards the end of the season. It's kind of like looking at the results of the race, even though qualifying was just a tremendous episode of what do we do now and what do we do next? At the end of the race, everybody was pretty much in the order that you would have expected for the grid to line up if there had been just clean weather and no rain. I think a new fan should kind of look at it and say, these are really the people who are lining up to challenge the front. These are the people who are going to kind of probably end up in the middle of the pack. And unfortunately, you're going to see these folks at the tail end for the most part the rest of the season.
What do you think, Dick?
I would add to that. I don't disagree with anything John's saying. But I also think that what we're seeing is the teams who are strongest in the development war that is now full on. The drivers are waging war on track, but the engineers back at the factory, they're on it. They've been going through the data. These upgrades that these guys are bringing, these were probably ideas from 6 to 8 weeks ago, and they're just now coming to fruition because you have the idea, you got to go test it in the CFD program, then you got to make a model, put it in the wind tunnel. Does it work? Yep. Okay. And then, you make the full on piece and say, oh, it really does work, or no, it doesn't work. Somehow we got a correlation problem with the wind tunnel, one of those kind of deals. But what gets me is, generally speaking, from the beginning, that very front of the field to the very end of the field, all of their bright ideas are working. And it's just sort of like, that doesn't usually happen that way. To me, it's just remarkable. And it tells you how good the tools are and how sharp these people are, the men and women that are doing the engineering back at the factory. I mean, I always hold with the idea that, half of my great ideas really are not all that great when I'm tuning a chassis. That's why I'm talking about podcasts and I don't work in Formula One. But I'm just so impressed by that. And I think that a new fan needs to understand that this is not the norm. All right. The other piece is that the gap from Red Bull to everybody else is getting narrower. And you've got to wonder, when is somebody like a Christian Horner going to start hearing footsteps? Because I tell you what, Aston Martin and Mercedes, they are in this thing all the way, and they are going to take it to these guys. Now, whether they'll pass them, I don't know. This is where those development penalties and all that start coming in, the fines from the beginning of the year, and the fact that they won the championship last year. They have less wind tunnel time than anybody else out there. We may start to see that deficit in tunnel time showing up as a deficit in development, which then opens the door for certainly Aston Martin and Mercedes. And at the same time, you look at what's going on in the midfield, and hey, with Williams, they were able to produce an upgrade package that only made it onto Albon's car. And you know what? He drove a very disciplined, very effective race in a car that really didn't belong to finish. It didn't deserve to finish where it did, but Albon drove an unbelievably good race, showed just how good that guy really is.
I didn't realize that until you just said that. You're saying the development efforts only got put onto Albon's car, not onto
Correct.
Logan's?
Yeah, Logan did not get that. So Logan only being like 0.3 of a second slower than Albon at one stage, I was sort of like, okay, when you have an upgrade package that clearly has transformed the car and you don't have it on yours, okay. I know the gap was a little bit bigger than that, obviously, when it all came out, but I think it was in practice where the gap between the two of them was actually quite close in similar conditions. And so I'm sitting there kind of going, all right, Logan is doing well, because the other piece of it was, I don't think he's ever raced at Montreal before. So brand new track to him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I had also been reading some stuff that James Vowles had said, like the quality of the materials and everything that Williams has been working with was like 20 years behind.
Right. I saw that.
And so when you say what you just did about Albon, then also seeing that Albon got points, my takeaway from that was what he is doing, he being Vowles, is probably doing what any consultant would do if they came in to assess a business, is figure out where are the deficits, what's the easy gains, let's start making that momentum moving. But obviously he's not a consultant, he's the principal. But so this is hopeful that they can make they should be getting some traction and being able to move forward. And then hopefully with Logan getting some more experience, that can only bolster the team to maybe start moving themselves away from the back of the grid. But John, I know that Dick and I have taken a lot of time talking one-on-one. I want to make sure you get to chime in. Did you have any thoughts about what we've been talking about?
Yeah, sure. And I think Dick is really on point here with all of this conversation about development, and I really appreciate that. The one thing I add back into this is, while I was saying that we were seeing the sorting of the mid and top and tail enders. I wasn't saying that to be disparaging, and I really don't want any new fan to think that way. When you look at the gap between first place in lap times and last place in lap times, especially in qualifying, they're really not that far off. And it is remarkable that they're bringing these cars to such a level of performance. And like Dick said earlier, the Red Bulls and the Astons, they're working different systems, different aspects of the track in order to get the performance. And it's a great look at how you can do different things to get the result that you need, which is a really quick lap time.
Well, as I was listening to both of you, what I kept thinking is, as a newer fan, is that this seems like a very natural moment after this many races, especially with the truncated testing in comparison to what you told me has happened in bygone years, is that this is where there's, like you said, enough data and enough time for them to have tested out some of the adaptations based off of the original concepts for the year, that now they can start implementing that. So this is like a moment where if we didn't see these types of improvements, we should be worrying for those teams. But that the fact that they are doing that means that they're on track, not necessarily overtake Red Bull, but give them a run for their money a little bit more than what we might have thought if we were at race one. Is that a good restatement of what you guys are saying?
Yeah.
Yep.
We
So that makes
see Max sweat.
Yeah. Well, we know who I want to be making Max really challenge that. I don't know. See, it's interesting to me listening to you two is I'm hearing Aston Martin, I'm hearing Mercedes, but I'm not hearing Ferrari. For me as the fan of Charles, I'm wondering, what does that mean for the rest of this year? And then what does that mean for moving forward? Like, what kind of hope, if they're not able to get this figured out like everybody else, does that continue to push them back of the field while the other teams are going to start passing them up? And then that goes to even something as simple as the tire strategy. When you said Charles was questioning and frustrated and should be careful, John, but I was right there with him going, what are they doing in their strategy, both specifically as Ferrari? But my question, I think I'd also want to expand it, is what did y'all think overall the tire strategy of the teams? Did they call it right? I put Ferrari in their own category right now.
You know, what's interesting is that, so Pirelli comes in, they've got 5 different tire compounds to choose from. What's interesting is for this race, the hard tire was actually the C3. In other words, middle of the road, really wasn't that hard, which then says that the medium tires, or a C4, was pretty soft, and then soft as it gets. I thought it was really, really interesting how these guys played it, because if you didn't know that they had done that Pirelli had labeled the tires like that, when you saw the tire strategy where they were saying, oh yeah, you know, they're going to run X number of laps on mediums, and then they're going to go to the hards, and that's what they're going to stay with, you're kind of like, how on earth is that going to be competitive? But the reason it's competitive is that the hard tire really wasn't that hard for this particular track, even though Max complained about graining for most of the race, regardless of the tires that he was on. I think it's almost like the tire strategy, it was there, but I don't think it really played a decisive role in the race per se. I think more than anything else is whenever somebody pitted, it was sort of like everybody else started pitting within a lap or two, because they had to cover the bet that the team that went in first was making. And so, you know, it seemed to me like this was a much more straightforward race from a tire strategy perspective, Ferrari excluded, than most of them.
Was it also because of the weather that had affected free practice and quali, everything up until the race? You didn't really have a lot of data. And then I feel like I heard one of the commentators say that this is a harsher track, like it's very rough.
Yeah. I mean, it's got those Canadian winters, and it's right on the water, and so it ices over and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, the other thing that I noticed, and I don't know if y'all did too, but when they were coming up to the chicane that leads to the start finish line, right, with the wall of champions and all that kind of stuff, they're going down that straightaway. And when somebody would pull out to make a pass, they get on the dirty line, and you could see just how much silt had been put on the track by the water that was just, you know, in torrents going over it on Saturday, because they were going out and they were kicking dust 25 feet in the air. It was crazy, which makes you wonder, what was that doing to the tires?
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
right, John? Because I mean, those tires are hot, and then you're picking up sand, heat and sand. That makes glass. Gosh, I wonder if that was sitting on the tires. I mean, it's just sort of like, I bet it was pretty exciting when they got on the braking zone.
Yeah, I bet so too. The only thing that I thought was really interesting about the tire strategy happened on Saturday, in my mind, and that was because the smart teams put a new set of inters on during the sessions so that they would have a brand new set of inters available if it rained on Sunday. And I thought that was thinking ahead, and I really respected that decision.
Yeah, that was actually something the commentators were trying to understand, and kind of, they were like, this is really odd. All right, so then let me ask you this question. Who caught your eye, driver team wise?
I thought that Piastri really executed a great pass, and as a rookie, I thought that was very notable because I can't remember now who it was he took on, but it was a seasoned pro, and he took him on in a really good pass. I thought that was noteworthy. I think you just have to tip your hat and really give lots of love and respect to Alonso for the drive that he is bringing. He is really bringing next game. He kept Lewis behind him. I don't think Lewis had any real chance of passing him, not because he didn't have the car that would pass him, but because Alonso's driving was so good.
Well, then what about this goes to psychological warfare. Do you think it was psychological warfare when it comes to Lewis's statement about Alonso?
Oh yeah. You're talking about his statement at post race when Lewis, they were on television, which Lewis knew and Alonso knew. Lewis commented that Alonso's slow start was because of his age, and Alonso took him on the shoulder and really gave him a firm one, which I think was for all of Lewis's positioning. I think ageism is one of the things he should add to his list of not being in favor. The psychological part, I kept looking about the pits for the guy in the white coat. You know the guy I'm talking about? I'm talking about Checo's psychiatrist. He needs to be at the track. I mean, this poor guy is just inside his head. Max is living rent free.
Yeah, it was rough for Checo this weekend. Oh, yeah. Well, it's like, I feel like Charles and Checo both need to go see a counselor and help them both realize it's not as bad as it is. You can get through this.
They need a trip to Dr. Phil.
That's right. That's right. Dick, what are your thoughts about the front of the field? Alonso's
Clearly at the top of his game. He knows he's got something that he can win with. You're starting to see old Fred come to life. that animal that lives deep down inside of this guy is starting to come out. They've got reportedly another big upgrade coming at Silverstone, which if I'm Red Bull, I'm just kind of like, great, they got another upgrade coming. It's one of those deals. We might see, what I would describe as fratricidal warfare between Red Bull and Aston Martin and I hope Mercedes. I would love to see at least a three-way battle for wins, if not a four-way battle, because Ferrari, let's face it, Ferrari needs to be winning races, and it would be really great. I don't hold a lot of hope for that, but I would really like to see Ferrari be competitive. Regarding the midfield, I think even though maybe they didn't get quite the results that I thought maybe they would get, I think McLaren is starting to fire some shots over the bows of, say, Alpine. Alpine looked good again this weekend, at least with Ocon. Gasly had some pretty rotten luck, quite frankly, that I don't think was of his own making. But McLaren, on the other hand, this upgrade package that they brought, again, it works. They could be a real problem, and it will be fun to see how Alpine responds. And if that drives them closer to Ferrari, because Ferrari, in my mind, could be very vulnerable to those two teams. For the others, I was really happy to see Williams come to life. I hope that upgrade package is for real. I would like to see them, have a better opportunity to score points. I was kind of disappointed in the day that Haas had, but you're going to have days like that. It was just one of those days where it's just sort of like no matter what they did, and they were trying hard, but they just went backwards. It was just one of those days. So
what about the two alphas?
They were a surprise, weren't they? And thanks for reminding me of that. I mean, they actually acquitted themselves, I thought, very, very well. And I don't know if that's just because of the nature of the circuit, it just really suited that car very nicely, or, have they found something? I would like to think it's something that is something that they could carry forward beyond just the Canadian Grand Prix. We're going to Austria next. It's a very, very different track. And so I definitely have some very specific thoughts about what that could look like, just because it's so different from Montreal.
The only thing I'd say about, I agree with Dick. Ferrari needs to be winning. They need to be winning. We need them to be winning. Formula One needs them to be winning. But if you go back just a few races ago, and you think about the faces that Lewis and Russell had, they were downcast, and that's where Charles and Carlos are now. So I think what with respect to going forward, if you come to a race weekend and you see Carlos and Charles smiling, feeling more relaxed, even if they're not at the top step, they're going to be a whole lot more relaxed. And I agree completely with Dick. They're vulnerable to both Alpine and McLaren at the moment. And hats off to Alpine. I thought their car and their drivers did a great race. Gasly was just really unfortunate. And all things being equal, he should have been in front of Ocon at the end had he not had that almost disastrous accident in qualifying, which was really bad and was nothing but down to Carlos and his team. And again, Haas and Williams, I really want to see them do well. They're both have American ties, and we in the same way Ferrari needs to be winning in order to sustain the interest and the involvement of Americans in Formula One. We need an American team, and we need an American driver.
Agreed. And, I think my parting shot is when we talk about Haas, that seems to be a very circuit specific car that they've got.
Yes,
because sometimes, they're kind of maybe not quite back of the pack, Jack, but they're getting close. And then there's other times where it's like, holy smokes, where did this come from? Both Magnussen and Hülkenberg, they're doing really well. And it's just sort of like, if I'm Gunther Steiner, I'd be ripping my hair out right about now.
I'd be hiring a new designer. I think you're right, Dick. I think that it's a car that can't be set up for all circuits.
Yep.
And the McLaren, Alpine, Mercedes especially, Red Bull in particular, they may have their weaknesses, but they're on top are in the right position basically every track, not just some.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a really good point. I don't think I would have picked up on that until now that you've said that. I'll be looking for that. Thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah, I mean, think about like Austria coming up, okay? And if that GPS data is correct, meaning that Red Bull and Aston Martin are really good through the slow and medium speed corners, well, that describes Austria pretty much. But on the other hand, the Mercedes puts the power down and they win the drag race between the corners. It could be really fascinating. It could be really tight between those three teams because they make their speed in different ways. The Ferrari, I think, is going to struggle because their strengths, based on what we know from Montreal, they're really fast in a straight line. Well, Austria doesn't have any real long straightaways where they can exploit that. So I think they're going to struggle.
Okay. For a second there, I got happy when John was talking about Ferrari and Charles and Carlos and putting in perspective with George and Lewis.
Yeah,
and then now you just said that and I'm going, well, That's
Uh,
just not okay. So I just need to. Okay. Thanks for that counseling session. So, John, let's move on.
The guy in the
Let's
white coat showed up.
yeah.
That's right, for Sabrina. Okay, so John, let's move on to the drivers. What do you think of our rookies, Oscar, Nick, and Logan? How'd they do?
I think Nick had a decent weekend. It wasn't fantastic. He could have and should have done better, but okay. He showed up. He put in a workmanlike drive. Piastri, I really am impressed with the guy. He did a good job, and like I say, the pass that he made was really committed and was very strong. Unfortunately for Logan, he's made to look worse, and this just happens in teams, especially budget teams where they don't have as much money as, say, Mercedes or Ferrari, where one car gets the development. It can happen even in Mercedes, but one car gets the development pieces and the other car just doesn't have them. So he was at a disadvantage comparatively in that. But, unfortunately, his car gave up on him, and he really needed a good drive for a couple of reasons, in my view. The first was he's on the North American continent, and we're all watching him. And so we want him to do well. And the second reason he needs a good result is because he's made some mistakes, and he needs to just put it down and get in there and do a good job.
Mm-hmm.
And the car just did not allow him even the opportunity to do that. And that's unfortunate. That's I really think that puts him on the back foot, and I continue to really pull for him, but I'm really worried about his long-term position with the team if he doesn't get a little bit better luck and apply himself as best he can.
Yeah, I generally agree with John. I mean, I don't think Logan's situation is nearly as dire, although I may just be way too optimistic, because I too want to see Logan not just survive the season but thrive. And so to me, I mean, not much you can do about blowing up an engine. I guarantee it. Probably nothing that he did. It was just the motor decided it was time to let it go. And I think where the rubber will meet the road is whenever it is that he gets the same car that Albon gets. Okay, now what's the gap between those two? Because that's really the only way that we can judge poor old Logan is that he's got a very good teammate who's well thought of in the paddock, who clearly has proven to be a guy with some pretty decent talent based on what he's been able to do with that car. Okay, when they're driving equal equipment, how do we sort out? If Logan's within a tenth or two of Albon, to me, that's a win. Because he's obviously, a tenth of a second, something like that. That's, you turn the steering wheel a little bit too much in one corner, and created a little bit too much tire drag or something. It's a very small amount. So, that will come in time. So anyway, I continue to be optimistic for him.
Yeah, I want to be as well. I think I'm rooting for him, especially because he's an American.
Yep.
And realizing that, I think, didn't you say this earlier, John, that this might be his first time on that track, and just having that time to experience this with the other rookies.
It is the first time that Logan has been on this track, to my knowledge.
Right.
And this is not the first track that it's been the first time he's been on,
Right.
nor is it the last.
Yeah.
So that has to be remembered when you compare him with Albon, because he really is doing a good job. Whether that's enough, and I'm optimistic and hopeful for him. But I think about Dick's point of view, and I think if you put your team manager hat on and he comes up at the end of the season and Williams lets him go, is a team manager going to hire him because he was a tenth or two slower than Albon? And I don't know what the answer to that is. Dick, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, and and I realize Formula One's a ruthless business and it's cutthroat and all that kind of stuff, but the guy did really well in F2. But where does F2 race? Well, it's primarily in Europe.
Yep.
And so you would expect that when they go to a track that he's raced on before, you would expect that the gap between him and Albon would narrow. But that when you're at a Montreal or a Miami or Interlagos or Coda,
Right,
Singapore,
right.
the list just goes
Yeah.
on and on, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the dude deserves at least 2 seasons because you really don't know what you have at the end of the first season.
Mhm.
You have a sense maybe, but I mean,
Well, and
you don't really know.
all the people who know, team managers, engineers, all of them say with the testing the way that it is, it takes a new guy in Formula One, which, let's just be honest, not everybody can go get in a Formula One car and drive.
Mhm.
So they've proven themselves to be very competent at a somewhat a lower level. But it still takes, according to those who are in the know and are in a position to know, it still takes them 3 years to fully come to grips with the car and the racing and the tracks. And so I agree with you. He certainly deserves 2 years. I'd love to see him get 3. But he really deserves a break. And I think maybe, Dick, you've kind of laid out our real comparison between him and Albon, and that is on tracks where he's raced before. Let's look at what he does with Albon there.
Well, I would even say, don't you think that it's not just how he does with Albon on the tracks that he's raced before, but also an equal car, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Sure.
That would also be, but I'm also thinking about one of our guys who's in a midfield car and who was a rookie who struggled, but now seems to be doing better, which would be Yuki Tsunoda or Zhou. Both of them were given time to do better, and it seems like they're improving.
Well,
I mean, they're not.
That's true. But here's the other side of the coin when you talk about equal cars, especially the teams in the lower half of the grid. Frequently, when they come to the track and they're working to try and get points, period, they're hedging their bets by putting it on one car and not on the other. So sometimes they may not have the part available. Sometimes they may not be totally confident that that part is going to improve things. So they're hedging their bets by putting it on one car and leaving the other car in the standard profile.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great way to compare data too, if you think about it.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Especially like if they go and they make all these changes, they put a different floor on or a different nose and all that kind of jazz. And so all of a sudden the car goes out in free practice 1, it's got the aero rakes on it. And now they're looking at the airflow coming off of the aero rake and comparing it with the data on a known quantity, which is what they've been dealing with for the last, 6 or 7 races. They know what's going on there. And they can look at it and say, yep, it did exactly what we thought it would do. Great. Our correlation to the wind tunnel is good after all. Okay, next race we can throw the new stuff on the other car as well, whatever, But yeah, that's kind of the thought process that they're going through. And really, you can't blame them.
I wouldn't blame them. Giving the driver enough time to acclimate both to track and to car while you're trying to do the development and you only have limited resources. It seems that the driver shouldn't be negatively evaluated because he may not be getting the same as his teammate. And that's not really his fault. And it's also not the team's fault in the sense that they only have what they have. And so they're making an understandable decision. I just hope that Logan gets the full time going back to what I was saying about Yuki and Zhou. I wasn't really impressed by them years ago, like 3 years ago. But this year, especially, I see how they're improving, and I'm hoping that Logan gets the same type of timeline to develop as a racer, the patience that I hope that the team will see his value. Well, we could keep talking. I love our conversations. I will say this has been a fantastic review of the Canadian Grand Prix. Okay, friends, what did you think of this conversation? Do you agree with Dick? Do Mercedes and Aston understand their cars better? What about John? He found Quali spectacular. My key takeaway is that we should expect some good results from Mercedes and Aston because they're closing the gap on Red Bull. Ferrari is still TBD. I'll continue holding out hope though. I am excited that development efforts across the paddock should give us some good racing moments, and that drivers across the grid will really be able to show us their racecraft. But enough about me. The guys and I want to know what you thought of this conversation. What follow-up questions do you think I should have asked? What are you interested in hearing us talk about in the future? And do you have feedback? If so, drop me a line via email, sabrina@2guysaGirlAndF1.com. Which leads me to say that the guys and I want to give a shout out to Troy, Ari, Doug, Adam, Wesley, Rob, Kelsey, Chuck, Haley, Steven, and Austin. You're valued members of the 2 Guys, a Girl, and F1 community. We really appreciate you taking the time to send your feedback. It's helping us build content and a community for everyone to enjoy. Are you following us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube? If not, we'd appreciate the follow. If you're enjoying our show, then please take a moment to rate and review us in your favorite podcast app. That enables us to get higher in the rankings. And of course, please continue sharing our show with your fellow F1 fans. Your endorsement of our podcast matters the most to us. It's listeners like you that are making this podcast a success. And with that, let me say, that ends this conversation. But rest assured, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.